Bueno, ¿listo, Keenan?
Sí, sí, estoy listo.
All right, Keenan. Well, again, we finally making this happen. Thank you so much for accepting my invite. I know this is a very busy, stressful time for you. I've been following you since COVID started, maybe a month after that. And I really want to thank you personally because you're doing an amazing job. You're my primary source of news, and I'm sure it's the same thing for a lot other people. So first of all, thank you for that. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate your time. So again, gracias por venir, señor.
Don't worry about it. No, absolutely. I'm happy to be in the role that I am right now for the community because of how important the work that we're doing is during this health emergency. It has been really an experience to see how much people have gravitated towards the work that I'm doing, and a lot of people have been telling me the same thing over the last few months that they trust me in the work that I'm doing with the coronavirus. So it does make me happy and feel like the work that I'm doing really matters to people.
No, it definitely does. We'll talk about COVID. We'll talk about vaccines. A lot of questions around that. But let's get started with getting to know a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about you, how you became El Paso's favorite news reporter.
I am originally from Raleigh, North Carolina. I grew up, born and raised on the East Coast, and loved it there. Obviously, a whole different world here from El Paso, but I'll get into that in a second. I went to college in Virginia at a small school called Washington and Lee, where I studied broadcast journalism, and got my first reporting and anchoring experience there, doing the student broadcast for 4 years. And after that, I made my way to Atlanta for an internship in CNN's Southeast Bureau, which was a really, really cool experience and a chance to shadow some of the highest level reporters in the entire country, at the network level, to see how they did the job. And from there, I was able to get set up with KFOX and CBS here to start my first professional on-air real-life reporting job, and that was in February 2019. So I'm going on 2 years here in El Paso at this point, which is really cool.
It is. Let's go ahead and go back a little bit. What made you want to become a journalist?
That is a really good question. I've always had a love for movies, for cinematography, for video. That was how I actually started it in high school, because we had a Video 1 course, and I loved movies, and I was like, I'm going to be a director, I'm going to be a filmmaker, and I got into it, and that's the first time I picked up a camera and started doing my own shooting and things like that. And the way that the course progressed was the first step was learning how to shoot and everything, but the Video 2 was the news program course, where you actually have to go out and shoot news packages in high school on stuff.
Was this junior year, sophomore, freshman? What was
I was
this?
a sophomore.
Remember?
I was like 15 years old, and that's the first time that was where my news career began, when I was literally 15 and shooting news packages about, I don't know, a blood drive on campus and things like that. And that was when, for the first time, I was like, this is like a practical application of kind of the skills that I love for like making movies and video, and I could see myself doing this.
Do you remember an exact moment that you said, you know what, I'm good at this, or I definitely want to do this as a career? Do you remember that moment?
When I was getting good feedback on the stand-ups that I was doing for like my packages. Like if you watch a story
What's a stand-up?
When you watch a story that I do, obviously there's the part where I'm just my voiceover and the video is there and I'm telling a story, right? But sometimes there will be parts in the middle of it where I'm on camera and I'm in a break-in just like explaining a situation, or even my live intro at the beginning where I'm on camera about to introduce my story. And my teacher was like, even 15 years old, you seem natural and you seem like you have a good handle on this already, like you're doing a good job. And they're like, that's something you can't really teach. So when they said that, I was like, okay, or this is kind of a real situation now. This is becoming real to me.
Well, did you have the support of your parents? Were your parents okay with that? Did they have maybe another plan for you?
My parents are both attorneys, so every day that I'm not in law school breaks their heart. So,
That's what.
and don't worry. Anytime there's any sort of issue at work, like I'll get frustrated when I have a hard day in the office, and my dad will be like, "Hey, I'm just feeling burnt out," and he's like, "Oh, there's always law school." I'm like,
That's
okay,
funny
I'm not
because
that burnt out.
that happens to a lot, but I'm sure they're proud of you because they know the progress that you've been making, and of course that you love what you do. I mean, you can tell the passion that you put into the work, so I'm sure they're also happy about that.
Yes, it's all in good fun. And I'm like, hey, I took the LSAT right when I got out of college, so I'm like, it's good for 5 years if anything terrible happens with my career here. So I got a backup plan.
Well, perfect. All right, let's talk a little bit when you moved to El Paso, right? So let's talk a little bit about the culture shock. I'm sure you experienced that coming from, again, from the southern states to not only another city, but this is a very heavy Hispanic community. So talk to us about that. What was the hardest part?
I went to a very big public school in North Carolina growing up, but the demographic of the community and I mean, the Hispanic population there was all but non-existent, right? I didn't have any interaction with it in my daily life to a point now where I got off the plane and I was like, wow, the wall is right there, first off. And like, you know, when you're driving on 10 West through, you got Juarez on one side and then on UTEP on the hill, and you just are like, I am on the border. Like, you imagine there's a stretch of desert or something for like 10 miles before you hit the wall. And I was like, no, okay, this is a border city in all measures of the word. Before I moved to El Paso, I didn't know anything about it. I had to Google it to see where it was. And I got here, and, you know, an 86% Hispanic population was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And it was not necessarily a bad thing, but it was just... it was extraordinarily different, both geographically to anything I'd ever seen, geographically and culturally.
What was the hardest part adapting to El Paso? Is it the language still, maybe? What is it?
Definitely not necessarily the language. The fact that I needed to understand what mattered to people here, because it was different than obviously my understanding in North Carolina of some of the things that mattered to people like my parents and their friends and family friends like that, and the community I understood. I had to come here and find out what was important to El Paso, because it's my job to tell them what's happening with what they care about. And so if I don't know that first part, I can't do my job effectively.
Give us an example of that.
What El Paso cares about?
Yes.
Chicos. No. Definitely, an easy one is when I got here. It was early 2019 at the peak of the humanitarian crisis, and for my first reporting job, literally get off the plane and there are migrants in the streets, and that was talk about a culture shock, right? It wasn't just the fact that the community of El Paso was so different. What the community was experiencing from outside was also national news and on everyone's radar at that time. And I had to go out with my camera, and they were like, all right, hit the ground running. And it was just a wild time to get into the field for the first time.
How do you feel now that you've been in El Paso for 2 years? Of course, you're now, of course, more acclimated.
Verdad, paseño.
Paseño, but sí. How you feel now compared? Do you still feel, I mean, you feel 100% now? There's still some things that you're still, that, I don't know, catches you by surprise? Is there anything there, or you're good now? What would you?
No, I think sometimes when I have to even tell stories in different neighborhoods, it's something that still is noticeable to me, the difference between the parts of El Paso that was not in any way the same coming from North Carolina. Like, people are so passionate about what part of town a certain thing is in. Like, when I told a story once last year or 2 years ago at this point, about, I think, Ross Middle School, and I said it was in Central, I think, and people are like, actually it's in the Northeast, and your entire story is irrelevant now. I didn't even listen to anything you said because you were so wrong. I think that's what, aside from high schools, that's what El Pasoans are most passionate about. And they're like, actually it's in South Central. No. Oh my God.
Regardless of how good everything else was, no, you know what, you lost them there.
He lost me when he said Far East. It was actually just Middle East by the airport.
Get it right, you white boy.
Exactly.
Right? You know what, I was checking your comments, and one of the comment trends that I noticed that a lot of people were, putting comments on is my favorite white person, and I thought it was so funny. I mean, I know that's a good thing, right?
But I hold that title hilarious. In high regard. I'm proud to hold up that banner. Going
back to the culture shock, I will have to tell you that we, as an El Pasoan, like, I was born in Mexico, but I mean, I've been living here for, 25 years, maybe 20 years, but we take that for granted. Even though I travel from Horizon all the way to the west side every day, and I see exactly what you mean as far as the border town, what's it called, Anapra, right there on next to by the west side. And we take things for granted. As far as speaking two languages, we take it for granted, right? Being able to understand once you travel and you meet other people that, you know what, that's not the norm. That's one thing, but also being able to adapt to different cultures. You're like, oh, okay, you know what, it is right. And then once you really analyze the situation or where we're from, I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and again, I work in a place that we have a lot of visitors from out of town, right? And the first thing they say is that, you know what, El Paso, they're really nice people. I can just tell you that they're really nice. And when I try to analyze, why is it that we're nice? Because I agree, I think we're nice people. And I think that because we're in the border and we have the advantage to see the situation in Mexico, which is not the best, but we also, now that we're here, we're in a better situation. We don't take that for granted, and because of that, we're nice. I don't know if maybe there's other reasons behind that, but that's kind of like one of the things that I think that influences as far as the way we treat people. For the most part, of course, and the way we handle our business here in El Paso.
I think it's the nature of being a border city, honestly. Like the relationship that you have, a ton of people, every time that I tell a story and people think that Juarez needs to be included, they will let me know in a second, of course. But everybody says two cities, one community, right? And it's the nature of the fact that El Paso is constant, like it's an entry point, right? People cross the border thousands of times every single day to live and work and go about their lives. And the fluidity and openness of that situation is part of the culture here. Absolutely. People are so welcoming. I love El Pasoans in general because you're right, they are kind, but I think that it's a big part of the fact that they have to live life with like that open door and that constant transmission of people, and that's part of the spirit of this community.
Yeah, I agree. Keenan, remember, it's not they anymore, it's we.
Oh, sorry, that was very xenophobic. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. But yeah, I think we're grateful because we see both perspectives, and again, that plays a big role in what we do and how we handle everyday life here in El Paso. Let me ask you this, and you said that you Googled El Paso because you didn't know where El Paso was to begin with. So my question to you is, why did you choose El Paso as your first job as a reporter?
Like I said, it was early 2019, and when I was at CNN just before I took the job, you know, the only thing on TV was El Paso. Even though this is a national network level newscast, everyone only cared about what the immigration situation was like here in this far corner of West Texas that I had no understanding of, but I saw it plastered on every national level newscast, and I was like, hey, if I have to go to a local market, right, for a job, and I'm obviously not going to be on CNN right now, but if I want to get my work up there to the highest level, what do people care about right now? It's what's going on in El Paso, and that was the main driving factor.
Well, did you have any doubts? I'm sure there was. Maybe, especially knowing that you're coming again to the border community. I know that maybe the job opportunity was too big, but what were some doubts? What were some things you're thinking about?
To be honest with you, it was all the job. Like I don't know a soul in El Paso, or didn't know a soul before I moved here, and it's about 1,500 miles from home, and it was going to be just an entire change of my life and the biggest jump ever, right? But for my career, it's what I had to do to take that first step and get on the train and start my professional life and become a reporter. You have to take that dive. When you talk about the nature of the profession, it's a lot of 2-year stints in different cities, and you move and you move and you move and try to climb the ladder. And it's just the expectation and understanding that these kids graduating from college, their first job is going to be in like Billings, Montana, and like just the most remote small towns in America that you can think of. Because that's how you get your foot in the door, and you learn, you go through the groundwork, and you pay your dues, and you build up. Luckily, I was able to start in a community that is so important on a national scale. That's why I came here.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. Again, we'll get back to the news portion of it, but let me ask you, because I'm curious. I'm sure you have family members, friends from back home, and when they ask what you do, and not what you do, but where you're now working at, how do you describe our city? How do you describe El Paso to them?
Ooh, that is a very good question. Absolutely, that it's a border town in the truest sense, right? That we are border city personified. I definitely, at this point, have come to describe the area the same way that a lot of people have whenever I do stories about border relations, and that like we are an interconnected city with a wall in between us here in El Paso and Juarez, right? That it's a borderland community where yes, there's an amazing culture and the people are incredibly welcoming, and the culture shock was more about me just being unfamiliar than anybody being, outwardly rude to me or not accepting. That never happened to me in El Paso, which has been awesome. Everybody's been so welcoming, but I do try to make people understand like this is kind of a big new frontier in American politics, and this is the place where what happens in El Paso matters. El Paso's stories are national stories.
Especially what's going on right now with President Biden, of course, and I know there's a lot of things to talk about that, but yeah, I can definitely see that. Now, talking about El Paso, how's your Spanish? You were telling me prior to starting recording the podcast is that you've been taking courses in Spanish. Talk to us about that. How's that going?
It's going very well. I have been doing intensive Spanish courses for about a month and a half at this point, with a service called Baselang, where I set up what time that I have during the day, and it's literally just Zoom calls with people in different South American countries like Venezuela, Colombia.
Are those teachers or just people that want to learn English?
They're language professors.
Oh, okay.
No, their job, it's not like I have to teach them English for a certain percentage of the time. These are Spanish professors in different countries. Some of them speak English, some of them don't. So the most advanced conversations are people who, born and raised in a remote part of Venezuela who don't speak any English. And when I'm like, how do you say this? They're like, I don't know. So I've got to figure it out. So yeah, estoy aprendiendo un poco de español ahora.
Wait, I can even hear a Cuban accent there.
Yeah, exactly, because I'm talking to, that's the hardest thing. I've already learned that Spanish isn't Spanish. Spanish is a mixture of all sorts of different dialects and accents, and it's already kind of been interesting to me that unfortunately I can easily understand Venezuelan Spanish, but Mexican Spanish is a little more difficult to me because I don't spend that much time talking to Mexican speakers. It's all people in South America, so the jerga aquí en México es un poco diferente.
I can even hear a different accent, Keenan, you're right. Now, I will tell you, and we'll talk about it after the podcast. You know what? I'm willing to be your Mexican. We'll talk about how much you're paying them. I'm willing to give you some really immersed classes in Mexican Spanish, by the way.
It is funny that I'm paying a bunch of people to talk to me in Spanish when 86% of the population here is obviously Hispanic. But I don't think they would want to sit there with me and watch me try to remember different verbs and parts of speech. So yeah, these people are very patient with me while I try to butcher my way through the language. But at this point, I would say that I'm at an intermediate level in my Spanish. Like, I'm conversational. I can talk all day about my job, my life, my family, and basic vocabulary. But like when I read news articles that have hyper specific vocab in it, it's just me and Google Translate right there trying to work through it. So it's definitely a learning process.
It is. And I'll tell you this much. Even though I was born in Mexico, when I go to Mexico City, Monterrey, Guadalajara, their Spanish is so proper that there's a lot of words that I'm like, oh. And I'm the Mexican, so I mean, I can just imagine. Sir, with that, have you been to Juarez?
I have been to Juarez one time. I went right before the pandemic hit in early 2020. And went and just kind of walked around a little bit, just ate at a couple restaurants, and was only there for a couple hours. So the big thing for me, and one of the points of emphasis with my Spanish, is like, I want to be able to nail it. I want to go to Cometa and Juarez and be able to order flawlessly. That's my whole deal. That's the end game.
Nice. Now, I will tell you this, that a lot of people from Mexico will tell you that if you go to Juarez, there's other places that you should go.
Other than Cometa?
For sure. But I get...
Slander.
We'll talk about that after. Okay. Senor, let me ask you this, because I'm curious, why is it that you want to learn Spanish? Of course, because you live in a border town, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that, hey, we're in America, this is my news are in English, so why you wanting to learn Spanish?
Because there are stories to tell here in El Paso that can only be done by having conversations with people in Spanish. When the border closures happened last year and non-essential travel was shut down, and we wanted to explore the impact on those people who live closest, the people in Chihuahuita, and how it was hurting them when they literally live footsteps away from the bridge. if you go out there, these are people who are Spanish only speakers. And I was able to, I had to rely on a photographer who spoke Spanish to be able to facilitate the interviews. And we came away with a story understanding that, you know, they were cut off from their family who lived in some cases hundreds of yards away, literally just through the fence. But the pandemic had cut them off and they didn't know when they would see them again. And it was a really powerful way to show that this community had been sliced in half basically by the pandemic. And because of my lack of language abilities, I had to rely on someone else to do that. And I hated that I was not able to communicate and to be able to form that connection with these people on my own. So that is a big reason for me, because the next time I go to Chihuahua to do a story, I'm going to be having that conversation myself.
And that just talks about your commitment that you have to your craft. Because as you're telling me this story, I'm thinking of, not that I know them personally, but of course there's other news reporters that have been in the city for a long time that don't speak Spanish. And I'm just curious as far as why is it that after maybe 10 years they haven't chose to. But that's a different story. But again, that just shows the reason why you're El Paso's favorite reporter.
Exactly. I'm not all the way there yet, but a really cool way I've started to be able to connect with people over the language is asking for things like movie recommendations and what kind of media I should be checking out, because that's a huge thing for me, is to get to the point where I still need subtitles to be able to follow along stories. But like I'm already loving some of the most prominent and classic Mexican movies, and I think Argentinian in one case. The first movie that I watched was Diarios de Motocicletas, which was the story of young Che Guevara. And that was, you know, like a classic Spanish language movie and one of the big examples to watch. And I'm like, I am hooked. Because I told you already, like, I got into journalism because I love movies so much. So this is an easy way to marry, like, the pursuit of the language for me and something else that I really care about. So I've already asked people to reach out with some of their favorites, and I have conversations with people about what shows I should watch, what movies. I'm also reading a book.
You're reading a Spanish book?
Yeah, Cajas de Cartón. That is the life story of Francisco Jimenez. He's a professor in UC Santa Clara, and he was un niño campesino in Mexico. He grew up on the other side of the border, but crossed into California and was able to live in a farming co-op and came into the public school system and eventually rose to become a professor. But that's kind of like a very American dream story, that he was a migrant child and grew up to become a very prominent and very important figure.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Just shows that whenever you want to accomplish something, you'll find a way to do it. Because I also know a lot of people that have been in this country for 15, 20 years. There's always an excuse, right? Like, oh, no, you know, it's too hard, or, you know what, that's just the way I am. I'm never going to learn. But it just shows, again, whenever you want to do something, you'll make it happen regardless.
No, it's an amazing story so far, and it's given me insight onto the people whose stories I've been telling, or I was telling, when the big waves of migration hit here. And obviously I can talk to them with the help of translators and hear that they're from Guatemala and they came here for their family, and have like a kind of very surface level understanding of why they would make that journey. But until I'm in the shoes of somebody who's walked me through the fact that, like, you know, they want this more than anything for their family and they want the prosperity, but to get there, I mean, he's in elementary school in an English setting and not understanding a word of school and having to sit there, and the impact and the alienation that they suffered to get that dream. It is so much more real and human, the stories that these people are sharing.
Wow, no, senor, thank you again for sharing that. Again, that just something amazing, and hopefully people can follow that as well. I want to spend some time talking about COVID, right? We can call you an expert on COVID per se. So let me ask you, first of all, you interact a lot with city officials, right? What's your honest opinion on how they have handled COVID since the beginning?
My honest opinion is that this situation changes essentially every 3 to 4 days in terms of not just monitoring the virus, but I mean, obviously now the vaccine rollout, the plan changes at every level. It's not just El Paso making its decisions, right? They have to game plan off of what the federal government says that the state has to say that El Paso has to do, and it's playing catch up basically on a weekly basis. So I feel for them truly to be in this position of making decisions. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be holding them accountable, because that's something that I need to do as well. Especially, it's never really me asking questions that I'm generating, right? Everything that I do is a situation where somebody in the community tells me, this isn't adding up to me, they're not understanding our needs, and something's wrong here, and we can do something better. So it's never intended to attack the people who are making these decisions, because I understand the fact that we're all in this together, right? This is a pandemic that affects all of us equally, and these people are trying to do the best they can. But when people tell me that something needs to be better, I'm absolutely going to go and take that right to them.
Right. Because, by the way, and I 100% agree with you, I have never questioned the intent of people. I know that everyone wants to, of course, help out with whatever it is. I just do question, do we have the right people to do that at times? For example, if you recall when Judge Samaniego wanted to do the second shutdown, or the third one at this time, and then there was that part that was it the city manager did not. So again, that I don't blame their intent for both, but there has to be a way to communicate better. There has to be different ways that it wasn't taken and they don't see. And this is something that I was talking to Shane and Lizzie. As far as, there has to be a way that it wasn't done. So we have to hold someone accountable. And I don't mean firing people. I don't mean it that way. But someone has to say, the ball was dropped here and it's not going to happen again. And I don't see that at all. So since you interact with them closely, I just wanted to hear your take on that.
No, absolutely. I think that was that was a disappointing situation when the leadership were basically just duking it out like that in the public sphere. And really, you never want to be in a place where the county leader and the city leader are issuing just smack talking statements about each other right during a public health emergency, when what the community needs more than anything is to be united in terms of leadership. That was very unfortunate, and I don't think anyone reporting on it got any pleasure out of the fact that we had to release the latest statement coming from one side or the other. It was really a sense that this isn't what we need right now. So that was, you picked a perfect example of a time where we had to take it to both sides and say this is not okay, and this is not what people need. We have to have a sense of direction here, because if one side's giving out a different set of rules than the other, and you guys are supposed to be the authority and who people turn to, nobody's going to know what to believe. And that was the biggest thing that people were telling me. Somebody just said there was a shutdown, but the mayor just said that it's not enforced. What do I do with my business? And those were the hardest questions for me, because I was like, legally, I think the county's opinion is the precedent, because it's more important than the city's. But also, it doesn't look like it's going to be enforced. So that was one of the hardest things. It was that was a period though where I committed myself to literally broadcast every single twist and turn in that saga of the shutdown story. And that was when people really started gravitating to my work, I think, for the first time, and people started to trust me in that sense as like a COVID authority.
Yeah. And the thing is that not that got me upset, but a lot of times they don't realize is that it's not only that disagreement that they have, but they're not seeing that they're turning people against people, right? Because if you feel this way, guess what? And then maybe your neighbor or someone else feels the other way. For the most part, and unfortunately, we don't know that. Again, just look at the intent. I always never question the intent from both. It was just the process, the way it was done. And unfortunately, there's people fighting against each other. Now we have a third situation that shouldn't happen because of that.
Without the clear direction, it was making people choose which set of rules to follow. And that was, I'm sure there were families that were torn apart by people who wanted to be as safe as possible versus people who needed to make decisions for the health of their business. And that's a situation that I'm glad is in the rear view. I would say that for this community. We have two Democrats in terms of the local leadership at this point, and they say that at this point it's going to make things way easier, because part of the issue was Mayor Margo was aligned very heavily with obviously Greg Abbott, the Republican governor, and that was a relationship that the county judge said was complicating things, because it was part of the disconnect that they had to cross party lines in order to accomplish certain things. They say that at this point with Oscar Leeser in the seat that they have they don't have an aisle to cross, and that makes decisions a lot easier to make.
Nice. Senor, what are your thoughts on the community? How do you think that we as a community have handled this pandemic? Not city officials, but now we as a community.
I think El Pasoans have to be commended for the way that they turn things around, because yeah, absolutely, when we became the epicenter of the pandemic, that was kind of like just a groundswell that slowly built up and became this disaster for us, right? And if people didn't change their behavior, we would still be there today, but they did. We have the data to show that people stopped moving around, that they stopped frequenting some of the most high-risk businesses, and only really started leaving for essential reasons in the majority of instances, and especially right after things got to those just awful apocalyptic levels. So the community needs to understand that they stepped up to make El Paso, not hurting in a world of hurt the same way that they were.
No, I agree. A big percentage did. I'm not gonna lie to you. When I myself used to not go out like to a restaurant or maybe just driving by a not a nightclub, but one of those restaurants, bar, and then I see it's almost at capacity. You're like, oh, are we really contributing to that? But then you see the other people that you know about, some family members that did choose not to go out and not to do the family gatherings. So again, I can see that take, but again, sometimes it seems unfair for that some people are the ones that we should not to be thankful for, but the ones that maybe contribute the most when you compare to that sense. Senor, I want to go back to a press conference because I remember this, and when I first saw it, I was like, I'm going to ask him this when Keenan is here with me. Do you remember the press conference, the city manager, that you asked him specifically about a city employee going out, right? No, wait. Not going out, having a party right before when they said or asked the city not to have gatherings, right? If you can please tell us what the response was for maybe someone that's not familiar with that, and also most important, what was going through your head as you were hearing the response?
Yeah, that was a situation where we got some pictures of the city attorney, Carla Neiman, who was holding a birthday party for her daughter, and the photos suggested that the party was being attended by people outside of her household. This is one of the highest ranking city employees in all of El Paso. And it was either that week or the week before that they'd passed the directive saying that gatherings were going to be restricted. You shouldn't be gathering with anyone from outside of your household, and only essential activities were going to be needed. And we went to the city, and I did ask the mayor, we got this evidence that this is happening, that this party was thrown by one of the highest ranking city officials, just as you're telling everyone else in El Paso that this is the set of rules they need to follow. So if the highest ranking city employee is doing this, how do you expect everybody else in the city, or just, regular El Pasoans, to follow these rules? And yeah, Mayor Margo responded that he had heard about the party and that he was upset that he hadn't been invited and that he wanted some cake.
What was going through your head? I make a lot of jokes sometimes when I'm not supposed to, write comments when, hey, not. But even I knew that, that was not a response that we are, as a community, expecting from him. So what was going through your head?
It was obviously not a serious response, right? He went on to clarify that he had understood that it was just members from her household, but when we said that the pictures don't suggest that, he blew off the question, right? And that was the reason that it got such a strong reaction was people were feeling that we were in such a state of emergency that every single question or aspect of decision making needs to be treated with the utmost seriousness. And when that didn't happen, I mean, my mentions were just filled with dozens and dozens of people who were upset at that reaction. In
your head, were you thinking, this is great news, this is gonna make a great headline, or you're like, oh, I can't believe he just answered that?
I knew immediately that it was gonna make people talk. That was definitely something that
which in your line of business, it's a good thing.
It's not always a good thing. I mean, it might be something we might get some clicks on an article, right? But I care first and foremost about El Paso and the health of the community. So I always want to make sure that the people in charge are doing things to the best of and utmost seriousness of their abilities, right?
Okay, so yeah, well, we'll leave that at that. Let me ask you, continue with COVID. You, again, and this is something that we already touched on, is that you've been able to do really good through COVID, right? So has this been intentional, or did it fall in your lap? Tell us the process as far as maybe was it a decision you made, like, okay, this is happening, I'm going to take full advantage of this. Talk to us about the process, please.
Well, I've been every day throughout the entire pandemic, I do an update on the numbers and to make people understand what the trends are, and because that's the data that people use to make really key decisions about, like, am I going to send my kid back to school and things like that. I want people to have that access to that information in a really accessible way. So I post the city's graphics and tell them, hey, look, in the past week, hospitalizations are up this much, or things like that, so that it's in really plain language and they can understand. Because I wanted people to have that at their fingertips, that information to dictate how they go about their daily lives and what decisions they make. So that's been one thing. But when I really decided to take it into overdrive was the shutdown saga. When I saw that this was important, this was attracting national attention, that there was this disconnect between the city and county, and I knew how critically important it was that everybody understands exactly each twist and turn of this story. Because, like I said, these people are like, do I close my business or not? Am I essential? What do I do? And there was just so much overload of information that I decided, like, I'm going to be the guy that's on top of it.
I want to take full advantage of the situation in the sense that I'm going to help the community, but at the same time, I want to make sure that my work gets noted.
I wanted to be the authority on the shutdown, absolutely.
Yeah, and you have been, by the way, sir. So thank you again for that. What are some other positive things that COVID has brought to you?
I don't want to say that COVID has brought me
well,
positive.
In any situation, and hopefully you agree with me, there's always, of course, the negative, but there's always positive in every situation, right? In my case, my business went down up to 40%, right? And this is something I was talking to, who was it? With Rick. But even though that was the negative, but it brought a lot of positive things. First of all, I was able to adapt. I was able to do other things. I was able to have time for something else. So my take is, what are some of the positive things that COVID brought to you?
I think in maybe my situation and I have to say countless family situations, it showed me what matters to me, because when we're locked down and when you're in a position where you're scared, you don't know what's coming up next, you kind of gravitate to the things that are important to you, and you take stock of why you're doing what you're doing and what kind of life you're leading. And I think that that was part of the motivation that I decided to go so hard with the shutdown saga, and also to try and step up and be like, I'm going to be the guy for the pandemic for these people, because I was like, this position of community trust is really so important to me, that the people in El Paso look to me for help. These are people who I feel a lot of responsibility for people who come into my mentions and are like, my landlord is threatening to raise the rent on me. I think that's illegal. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. And like in a lot of situations, if I do the right story, that could have an impact on their life. And that is something that it made me understand every day why the work that I'm doing mattered.
Wow. Yes, absolutely right. And thank you for that. Because again, I remember when the shutdown, you were the one that I would check in on the news, because I knew that as soon as there was going to be, and maybe I was busy doing something else, I was going to hear from you. And now that again, the other stories that maybe I do not know about, it just gives you a different perspective on the importance that you don't know how it's going to impact someone else. So again, thank you for that. Senor, my final question on COVID, give us some insights on the vaccines. I still don't get it. I saw just a friend post something. He's 25 at UTEP. He's getting his vaccine through UTEP. And I understand, I think they had, of course, right now you're going to give us a little bit more details, but I don't understand why him being 25, 26, instead of maybe the hairstylists that are a little bit older. And again, maybe they're not so in touch with social media and what's going on with the vaccines.
So, for everyone's understanding, the current progression for our rollout is that the state of Texas is vaccinating Phase 1A and 1B personnel. Phase 1A is anyone you would think of as frontline workers who are going to be nurses and people treating COVID patients, but also a ton of other positions like emergency services, firefighters who drive ambulances, pretty much everyone you can think of under first responders. And that's Phase 1A. Phase 1B, though, Texas was the first state in the entire country to kind of break from the CDC and decide to move into Phase 1B. And this was a very deliberate decision because it opened up the vaccine pool for possible registrants to so many more million people in the state. And Phase 1B is people over the age of 16 with underlying conditions or severe conditions that would make you more prone to a severe reaction to COVID-19. And it just anyone over 16 that would have things like diabetes or asthma or conditions that would classify you as high risk, but also people over the age of 65, just anyone. So they're all eligible for the vaccine. That's where we stand in terms of today's rollout, but there's no real difference in the priority of the two groups at this point. They're both it's open season for both of them if you can get a slot, right?
Because UTEP got their own batch of vaccines.
975.
Right?
Yeah.
Are they following that protocol though? They're following their own. I mean, I know their staff maybe or their elderly.
If you're over the age of 16, the current system in El Paso is based on the honor system for Phase 1B. Oof. You don't need to present a doctor's note. You show up and tell them that you are asthmatic and you can get a vaccine.
Okay. Well, that explains a lot. You, my friend that got the vaccine, I really hope that was just but okay, that makes sense.
No, I mean, a ton of people are concerned about it, right?
Again, that could be the case. Mm-hmm. It's just that, again, there's so many questions. And then I think one of the things you were covering maybe today or yesterday was that, I mean, what if, again, I don't know about this. I don't hear about this. The hairstylists maybe don't speak English. How can they contact someone? How do they sign up if maybe they're not in social media or maybe, again, they don't know about this? So
right. The city's list is managed through epstrong.org and a new website that they launched, which is vaccineep.org. They have a new registration site that's supposed to make things a lot smoother, but everyone's seen these stories about the concerns that they have. Like, hey, my 30-year-old neighbor just got vaccinated yesterday. He's healthy as can be, and my grandma can't get a slot. What's going on? Unfortunately, that's a nationwide issue, right? Nobody's happy with the way that this rollout is going, and that's a product of the supply. This has been a situation where we have, at this point, Pfizer, Moderna, and hopefully coming up soon, a new vaccine from Johnson & Johnson that could be approved according to the state in the month of February. So that would greatly increase supplies, but right now it's a trickle. We get like 10,000 each week. Obviously, there's a county of 1 million people. So it's going to take a little while because that's going to be more than 1 million doses. You have to get 2 shots in some cases for Pfizer and Moderna. It's a process where people need to, the city just says that you need to be patient and just kind of keep the faith that your number is going to be called. But I think one of the biggest frustrations we've heard from people is that the city's website, where you just go in, you plug in your name, you just wait after that. Like there's no notice given about where you stand in the waiting list, which is frustrating for a lot of people because they might just get a call and they're like, go get your vaccine tomorrow and you have to be ready.
Well, I didn't know about that. All right, Sarah. Well, by when do you think El Paso will be vaccinated? I mean, just an estimate, of course.
Our timeline right now is that the general public vaccines for all who want them is going to be happening in the summer.
In this summer, okay.
In the summer, yeah. By September, we are trying to be vaccinated. Herd immunity is the goal here. That's something people talked about before in a less healthy context by saying that people should just all get infected and that once everybody's had the virus, then we'll all have herd immunity. That's what the vaccine is doing by making sure everybody has antibodies, at least 75 to 85% of the population. At that point, there's not the risk of the virus running rampant through the community and we can safely reopen and maybe even do away with some of the safety measures. Like there is a future without... The understanding right now is that there's a future without masks and social distancing, but it comes after we hit 85%, which is hopefully going to happen by the fall.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's good. I wanted to ask you, Have you heard any stories of people that did get vaccinated, well, that got the vaccine and maybe got sick, anything like that? Have you heard, or so far so good?
Luckily, there have been some stories about people having a reaction to a
Paso?
COVID vaccine. Not in El Paso, even in the entire country. Like there's been a few stories, like the New York Times did a report where a doctor got his first shot and had an allergic reaction and had to give himself an EpiPen shot to ward it off. And, you know, they do this big headline and say, you know, doctor has severe reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine. And then like 9 paragraphs down, they also add that this reaction has been documented in about 1 in a million recipients of the vaccine. It does seem like it's a really safe process at this point, which is awesome because people have talked about booster sickness, and that's the second shot. So apparently the first shot might make you have some symptoms that amount to like a sore arm, but the second shot where you get the full dose of immunity, that's caused some people to maybe feel a little under the weather for a little bit, but nothing like a severe anaphylactic reaction. So that's something I think people have worried about, but from my understanding, it's not serious. It's just like, hey, your shot's working.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I was just curious to see if maybe you heard anything from El Pasoans.
I haven't heard of any El Pasoans who have said like, my first shot absolutely floored me, and I'm not getting the second shot because the reaction was so terrible.
Yeah. And if they do, make sure they DM Keenan. Of course.
Have you had an issue with the COVID-19 vaccine in El Paso?
Do you get a lot of DMs when you ask questions regarding that?
No, absolutely. Like when I have stories, the best part about the following that I've been able to build up on social media now at this point is, you know, a day will come where we want to do a specific type of story with a specific type of person's reaction, and all I do is just go to my Instagram stories and say, hey, I need to talk to this very specific type of person, and the odds are good that I get like 5 responses that day, and that's more than enough to go off of for a story.
How do you filter which one to pick?
Whoever comes first. Like when
Oh,
I'm
really?
a report, yeah,
Okay.
when I'm a reporter on deadline, no, it doesn't matter. And I mean, maybe a situation will happen where somebody's got a better story and they come late to the party, and I'll be like, oh. But I would much rather have the story to be able to tell, so people can understand what's going on, rather than, you know, delay it and try to fit the better one in.
Well, we'll talk about that process as well right now. Let's talk a little bit about fake news now. Senor, I hear this all the time, fake news, right? First of all, is that a real thing?
Is fake news a real thing?
Yes, and let me ask you this, because the reason I'm asking this, I'm sorry, it's because it's all about perspective. Even though they tell you exactly that wall is black, it can be perception as well, right? So I'm just with the concept, what does it mean? Well, what does fake news mean?
Well, fake news is a catchphrase that was coined by the Trump administration to discredit some of the established sources that basically American journalism is built on, in terms of like the New York Times and CNN, obviously some of the biggest antagonists of the president. As far as I understand it, it is just a catchphrase for the far right to discredit real journalism and to cast doubt on some of the stories that have been critical of that administration. It's my understanding that it's not a genre of websites that are just, you know, not based in fact.
Because what I hear all the time, especially when people are not agreeing on something, no, you get your news from fake news from a fake source, and then you hear the same person talk about the same. Like, well, what if both of them watching the same thing? It's just the perception that they're getting. For the average person, how can you tell fake news from real news?
An easy way to do it is if you're getting your news on Facebook. And
That's one, yeah.
Yeah, that has been the biggest issue with spreading disinformation about the election and other aspects of our life, and even coronavirus safety measures. There are people in, you know, the community who've been led to believe things like wearing your mask causes you to breathe in your own CO2 and it's actually worse than COVID, and all these things. There's so much misinformation about health and also the election that's come through because of Facebook and Facebook news. And the easiest way to tell is to look at the sourcing of the article. Like, you're clicking on something that's been posted by like freedomeagle.net. Okay, let's try to contrast that and see if you can find the same source on something like the Wall Street Journal or any credible, or even a local news website, because local stations, and that's a whole other discussion, but nobody should ever say fake news to a local news person, because like these are people who literally just, you know, make very little money and put themselves through the ringer in this job, in this occupation, to work for the community. And I mean, in some cases, they're like meteorologists who are telling people it's going to rain, and they're getting fake news comments, and that's just infuriating for people inside of the industry, because they give their heart and soul and get not a lot in return to really help people.
Yeah, no, great advice. And as you're telling me this, I just know about a lot of people not even sharing articles, just a comment from someone else, a post from someone else, that again, you're like, really? And
it's become, yeah, just like an argument refrain, where if you don't like something that's being shared, that's fake news.
And guess what? And in the comments, oh yes, and then and they just come up with like another story to kind of validate that fake news or whatever that story. And it's just a circle that goes on and on and on. All right. Well, thank you so much for that, senor. Let's go into the process of a story. You've been a reporter for 2 years now here in El Paso. What's the process? Who tells you, okay, you're going to cover this? Do you come up with that? And then you drive all the way over there. You interview people. You write your own script. Well, maybe I'm telling you the process. Well, tell me what the process is.
You actually, yeah, you did a good job there laying it out. But my position title is multimedia journalist. So the expectation is that I come into my day and I pitch the story. And that's, you know, whatever idea I have that people need to hear about and what's affecting the community.
Where do you get that? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Social media a lot of the time, but also if it's a situation where there's an ongoing situation, like with the vaccination process, or you know, testing earlier on in the pandemic, like overarching coronavirus stories, I'll say that there needs to be, I'll think like, hey, we need to ask this question to the city and make a story out of that. But you know, I've got to pitch the story, I've got to come up with the idea and pitch it. And so if it's approved, or if there's something more important, maybe they'll tell me that my story is something different. But regardless, I get the assignment, and yeah, I have to drive to wherever, and I have to shoot the video. I have my own camera and recording equipment and interview supplies as well. So I'll do the interviews, I will shoot the video, and then come back to the station, and I need to edit the package.
The whole thing.
Yeah, so I'll voice it over using a microphone that looks a lot like this, and I do the voiceover, email it to myself, and then I have a script ready after writing my story, and then I edit the story. And all of this it's only about a minute 30 project on when it's finally rendered and exported, but you know, it's a whole day affair because there's so many steps of the process.
And
then I presented at 9 o'clock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. What's the hardest part of it? Is it getting the story to begin with? Is it once you're in front of the microphone? What is the hardest part of this whole process? The
easy part for me is when I actually get to present it, right? I think the two hardest parts are the story finding process, because that's every day. You have to have a good idea and something that is impactful and matters to El Pasoans. And you know, it can be a random Tuesday in January like we are right now, and I've got to be like, what's pressing, what do people care about, and what do people need to hear about right now? And there might be a time where I'm drawing blanks, and that's the hardest part of the job for me, making sure that I always know what people, and I'm always bringing to the table what people need to hear. But aside from that, editing after every other step of the process, like going out in the field, shooting the video and doing the interviews and everything, and then writing, it's so mentally taxing, and I'm so drained that by the time it's time to edit my story, I'm just like, okay. But once you've done it enough, it also is like kind of natural. Like it's something that I've grown to love in one regard. Like I own my story. Like I'm the one from start to finish. This is all me.
Wow, I'm so glad I asked you this, because this is something that, I mean, I didn't think about it this way, but it seems that reporters, especially the good ones, they have to have really good perception to know and understand what is it that people are going to care about. Because when I think about maybe some people that don't have that good perception, well, it might be that today there's a lot of cars in the road, and that might be their story that they may want to select. I always thought it was someone choosing those stories 100% of the time, that this is where I want you to cover, well, what I want you to cover all the time. But the way you're describing it, it's you most of the time that come with the ideas. There's going to be sometimes that they'll maybe tell you, okay, this is the direction that we're going. But then again, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that reporters have to be really good at perceiving things in the community.
Hey, I have to have all the tools to put a story together, but I also have to know what's going on in the community. Like, you got to keep your ear to the ground.
Well, senor, a lot of times I'm sure that you, on a daily basis, you deal with stress. How do you deal with stress?
Man, I work on deadline for a living, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. All those steps of the process have to be done in like a 6-hour period for me to be ready to have the story ready for 9 o'clock when I present it on the news. So yeah, stress is a constant in this line of work. I get my days off though, and yeah, I'll have to have story ideas for when I come back to work, but it's also a time for me to do things that relax me and that it can help me decompress. Like in this case, learning Spanish. I love learning languages. I'm also fluent in French, so I am quiero ser poliglottal, and I wanna be able to have that, like, just at this point trilingual aspect to bring to the table, which is really cool for me. So I love learning languages and playing music as well. As that's a big part of my life, and I think that's something people think is interesting coming from a reporter.
It's extremely interesting, and we'll talk about that. Let me just ask you one more question regarding being a reporter. Now, for anyone following you, it is more than evident that your progress, I mean, it's really good. The type of stories that you're covering, you're being a news anchor on a more consistent basis as well. Aside from your good looks, which need to be recognized, what other things have you done or have worked on to get you where you are right now?
What other things have helped me on my journey? Definitely the connection that I forged with the community. Like when I got here in 2019, obviously you get off the plane and after a couple weeks of training, they're like, okay, what's your story for today? I was like, I don't know anything about these people, right? So the growth within, in my place in the community, and the fact that people trust me enough to come to me with things has made my stories better, right? Because there's stuff that people want to hear about, and El Pasoans are like, I want to have Keenan look into this, right? So that has been huge. You can't overstate the impact that's had on my work getting better, but also just time in the saddle, right? The game slows down, and I understand the things that I need to work on, and just try. I'm like, I want to get a little bit better every single day, and I do care a lot. I try to pour myself into the work that I'm doing because I want to be the best that I can be for this community.
Well, and again, you're doing an amazing job there. Now let's talk about the interview you had with the governor of Texas. Congrats on that. I really thought your questions were on point, pun intended. Were you more nervous on that interview, or were you more nervous on the Cardi B story that you did?
Oh God, I knew it was coming.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Was I? I would have to say the Cardi B story, because that was literally 2 months into my job, and that was a time when, like, every time I went live, I was nervous, and
Do you mind telling us the backstory of that for anyone not familiar with that?
I will
please?
tell you the backstory. I was assigned. I did not pitch the story to cover the fact that Cardi B had been scheduled to play a concert at the Coliseum, and she pulled out for complications unknown. And they wanted me to go to the parking lot of the Coliseum and see if people came still to try and see Cardi B, even though the concert got canceled. And I was like, I had pitched like a really hard news story that day about like migrants and something really serious. So I was like, okay, all right, I'll go do the Cardi B getting canceled story. And I went out there, and I was like, I did interview like 3 or 4 people who had come. Like, some people had driven like 5 hours from other parts of West Texas and got to the parking lot and were like, I was like, didn't you guys look at the website? But that was, yeah. So got those interviews down, and then I was like, I want to present it in a way that's going to be memorable and that's going to make people remember the story. So I decided to integrate Cardi's trademark sound. Yes.
Which is what?
I haven't done it in 2 years, and I'm not going to replicate it.
Hey, I had to try.
I know. I haven't done that in years. So I did occur on air, and it went viral. It was on Good Morning America and all over the place, and it was a lot of fun getting the attention. But in terms of me being more nervous back then, like, I was especially nervous because I was like, if I nail this, it's going to be it's gonna go everywhere. But if I screw it up, then I'm the guy who screwed up saying "oh,
That
girl"
was
on the news.
amazing, and I will include a link so people can see it. And if you really analyze it like I did, that clip, you can see your hands shaking.
I was so nervous. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That time, that was something that probably happened on like 80% of my live shots back then.
Really?
Yeah, like when the camera started, I would just be like, yeah, because I was just
What
hyped
helped
up.
you get through it? That might help
Repetitions,
someone.
repetitions, definitely, and the fact that like you really can't be. It was from a lack of experience that was making me uncomfortable, and like when the light comes on, like deer in headlights. But at a certain point, like if you do it enough, like there comes a point where being on TV for me is just it comes more natural.
Yeah. No, and that was great. And the fact that you chose courage over comfort zone, that was amazing. And that just tells, again, now that we hear more of your story, everything makes sense. It's not nothing happens random. Of course, there's a reason why, and because of that, maybe that's where, again, it has led you to a lot of other things, right? So thank you for sharing that. I want to get a little bit into a serious topic. I want to talk about August 3rd of 2019. For those not familiar, this is where a gunman killed 23 people, injured another 23 at a Walmart Supercenter. I know that at this time you had 6 months in El Paso, right? Tell us about your experience around this time.
When August 3rd happened, I was really feeling burnt out at that time with being
6
a
months
reporter.
in.
6 months in, it was the honeymoon phase had worn off, and this job is just, I was like, this is so hard every single day to have, the story idea. I wasn't necessarily having a ton of good ideas because people didn't know who I was. They weren't coming to me with their problems, and I wasn't having that success with the community. And I was exhausted also having, how hard the multimedia journalist job is to do all the steps. Like I was mentally and physically just like worn down. So I was off actually on that Saturday, and I got called in. And the events of that day, just getting out there to the scene, on top of this Yellow Vista Mall, Walmart on the park up there, and just seeing just the chaos and the people scattering around, trying to track people down, and speaking with multiple people who were inside and hearing their stories, and just kind of vicariously living through that day for about 12 hours, and then going to a shelter where the family reunification center was, where people who were inside the Walmart were supposed to go to find their families. And I was the first person to speak with the family of one of the victims of the shooting, which was the Englesby family. She came to me. Angie Englesby came and was obviously beside herself, looking for her mother, who it came out later was lost in the shooting. It was just like a palpable grief and tragedy in the air for really a week straight. I feel like I broke down, lost it after that day. It was the most probably emotionally charged event of my life at that point, having to deal with so much tragedy and so much pain, and people telling me how much they'd lost in so short of a time period, but also the fact that came out later that it was an attack from an outsider, allegedly telling police that he wanted to, or telling prosecutors that it was a racially motivated attack on a border community because he was looking to stop an invasion of people into this country. That put things into an entirely different light as well, because it was like, this wasn't somebody who snapped suddenly. This was somebody who allegedly drove for hours from the central part of the state to hurt El Pasoans. That was a direct attack on this community. And I think that event and the tragedy of it is going to always be my why I'm still in journalism, and why I care so much about the job that I'm doing. Because the aftermath of that attack was one of the most periods of love and outpouring of support that I've ever gotten from anyone, and it came from El Pasoans who would see me doing my job and telling stories about the recovery and the resilience of this community after the attack, and they would come up and they would thank me, and they would make sure that we were doing okay, and they would want to tell us that what we were doing mattered. And hearing it over and over and over again, and finally understanding why the work that I was doing mattered to El Pasoans, and it wasn't just about me being on TV. That was a turning point for my life.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And as an El Pasoan, I hate to speak for most El Pasos, but what I felt, and I think a lot of people felt, is that we couldn't believe it. I just in El Paso. I mean, I know that you're newcomer to El Paso, but the fact is that those things don't happen in El Paso, right? We hear about that, and we're like, oh, it happened somewhere else. So when it happened, I mean, it was, first of all, people couldn't believe it, and once it hit, you're like, why? And there were so many other questions. And of course, we're turning into the news and then watching another source and then another, because we want to hear so much. And again, that's where like you said, now you can see the role that you play does make an impact. The words that you say, who you interview, the story that you choose, because I'm sure there was a lot of things that you could have talked about, and everything was going to be listened to, of course, but it just choosing, okay, this is the take that we're gonna do, and this is what's going to impact more people, right? So again, that was just something that not that I was curious, but definitely wanted to hear from your standpoint, because you were in the front line reporting, and it wasn't only day one or day two. How long was how long time did you spend reporting on it? Was it
we did August 3rd stories for 2 straight weeks at the very least. Obviously follow-ups down the road with victims and their recovery process, different families and how they were trying to move past it. But like that, a single event consumed my life for probably, I would say, the next month.
Really? And that's what you said, that even though I'm sure there was a lot of difficult time around that, having to do all the work that you do, but that's what helped you get through, okay, this is the reason why I'm doing it. It's just a reminder, and from there on, it give you a different light on what you do, right?
Absolutely. No, I'm so grateful for the community for coming out, because, you know, I was also an outsider at that time. You know, I'd only been here for a couple months, and they didn't have to in any way tell me, you know, why the work mattered to them, but they did, and they came out in droves to make sure that we understood that, you know, these stories matter to them, and that they loved us for the work that we were doing. And that was so important to hear.
All right. No, and again, thank you for your work. Let me ask you this. Aside from that tragic event, do you recall other stories that maybe have impacted you? Of course, not at that level, but other stories that you remember have impacted you?
I think that the defining story of the pandemic for me is going to be one that it wasn't in El Paso. It was coming from Las Cruces, but the sentiment of it is universal, and it made people, it humanized the pandemic in a way for me that really I'd been trying to block out because of the sheer, you know, the toll that it's taken on so many families. But this is the story of the Garcia family who live in Las Cruces in Doña Ana County.
Let me interrupt you. How long ago was this?
This was just a couple months ago at this point.
Okay.
This was a family who their father, Jose Garcia, had been put into a COVID ICU at Memorial Medical Center in Las Cruces. And one of the employees at the hospital, one of the nurses, was his own daughter, Carolina Garcia. So she would come to her father's bedside in the COVID ICU and would look after him as well, while he battled, you know, the most severe form of this virus. And the family would, for hours every single day, because this was on the ground floor of the medical center, and there were windows from the ground floor out onto the lawn outside. They had set up lawn chairs and brought blankets, and they were there around the clock, looking in on their father and trying to send love, while they had Carolina, who they called their angel in the ICU, inside trying to tend to him and try to help him overcome this virus. And seeing the pain there and understanding what she meant to them and their family in the fight, it was the most humanizing experience of the pandemic for me so far.
Was it hearing the perspective from the nurse, which at the same time is a family member, and then
not from the nurse, but even her sisters, who were, because it was a unique experience, and it wasn't a unique experience. All these families who have loved ones who are hospitalized can't go in to see them, but, you know, they're separated by only a few feet, and there's this division between this person who they love more than anything in the world, who's going through this tragedy and the struggle, and they can't be there, but they have somebody who can, who is fighting for them. And unfortunately, Jose Garcia did end up passing away from the virus, and the pictures from the Las Cruces Sun News and other outlets out there of the family's grief it brought it all back again. This is just 400,000 lives have been lost in this country due to the pandemic, and I think that's a number that people can't understand. Like, there's no way to visualize the real impact and loss that 400,000 deaths has caused. Our minds aren't built to wrap around that kind of catastrophe. And it's these small ones where it's a family that is hurt and that is, shattered by the impact. Just one family that really makes us understand.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. All of us, of course, have a different take on it, or how we take it, how we feel. Not that we don't believe it, because we know that it's real. But of course, you hear numbers and, yeah, it's a number. You hear the daily, okay, well, maybe, because again, and I don't know if it's done because you don't want to see the harsh reality. I don't know why sometimes we block, even when you hear 20 deaths, 30. I know it was not overnight, but it's until you meet someone that, like, they're not lying, that that you've seen that parent, that grandfather, whoever it was, that, you know what, I know this person, and this person was healthy before this. And that's when you start, like, realizing and kind of, like, viewing it another way, taking extra precautions. But not only that, but also, like you said, having a different perspective on my own life, on the things that really matter, especially for those that maybe were not in tune with that before, that our life can change so quickly. And this is something that has opened up, hopefully, the eyes for a lot of us. And again, hopefully when this is all over, we don't forget and we go back to whatever we had going that maybe was a negative part in our lives. Pero bueno, señor, muchas gracias. Let's talk about, in the same line, I know a lot of friends, a lot of people that don't watch news because they believe that, you know what, I don't want to fill my head with negative news, right? It's always negative, so I don't want to watch the news, so I don't watch it and I'm happy. And I understand that point of view, but at the same time, like, if you're doing with the news, there's a high chance you're doing that in your real life, meaning that you're going away from your problems and you're not facing them. Now, in your case, since you have to present, and even if you don't present them yourself, but you hear other negative things happening on a daily basis, what's your take? Does it affect you? Can it affect you everyday work on an environment that you hear negative stuff coming back after back?
Absolutely. I think that a conversation that's been had a lot in recent years is the mental health of journalists who have to, for a living, process some of the worst days of people's lives and some of the most horrific emotions and tragedies and internalize them. When I tell a story, it has to go through me, and I have to turn it around every which way and understand and present this and in a lot of ways feel these feelings myself to make sure that people can understand what's happened. You do that every day, even in a low level situations where, it's a constant stream of negativity and it's going to have a toll on you. When we talk about something like August 3rd, though, it can break people. Definitely, that was a situation where a lot of people in the community who worked in news needed to take a step back and take care of themselves, because even if we weren't directly impacted, the nature of our work is being a vessel for these feelings and taking in tragedy and converting it into a story for people to understand. And when all of that passes through you, and when you have to be immersed in it for so long, like for me, a month straight, it was disastrous for my mental health. Absolutely. I needed to take time to center myself and to reflect on the things that, were positive about my life, my job, but also to rely on my friends and family, because then the nature of this work is absolutely, it can be very deleterious to your mental health.
Are you concerned about the long-term effects still?
I don't.
Is that something you think about?
I don't see myself as having ongoing, like, post-traumatic stress from the shooting or anything like that. I know what it felt like that day. I will always remember the flashbulb emotions of the air being thick with just the fear and the sound of choppers overhead and the chaos. and the just overarching sense of tragedy and the way that it made me feel and the emotions that it elicited in me. Like, I can recall them at any given time. So I don't know. It's not like it's ever going to leave me. Definitely.
Yes. For the people that think that way, and I'm pretty sure maybe you know someone personally as well that they never watch the news because it's always negative and they don't want to put that in their head. In your opinion, of course, everyone has their own opinion on this. Is that a good take on it? Is that a bad take on it? Is that, I mean, it's going to be up to them. What are your thoughts on that?
There might be normal situations in your life where in regular times, if you don't watch the news for a week, you might miss that there was a car crash on I-10. And you might miss that, I don't know, the back to school is getting started, and some natural, normal stories, and just you won't be updated on what's happening in your community. That's what you're going to be missing out on, right? You won't know what's happening in El Paso. And maybe that's not something that you're interested in, and it won't have any bearing on your life. If you skip the news this week, you might miss your chance to get a COVID-19 vaccine. And this is a time where the information that we're giving, I'm not just telling stories, I'm telling you what you need to do in your life to take the best steps for your family to be protected.
Well, that's such a great view on it. I also see the other type of people that sometimes just watch the news to have something to complain that same night or maybe the next night. Oh yeah, El Paso city officials or vaccines, with the purpose of, this is like my material which I'm gonna hate on this week, you know. So I mean, of course we have those type of people, but hopefully we find a balance, because I see both, again, those perceptions on both. Just to close out the topic, sir, what are some recommendations that you can give people that want to start in journalism?
They want to start in journalism in a career. I think that you need to know what avenue you would like to get into, because if you want to be a reporter like me, you have to have a certain set of skills in order to be considered for a job, because everybody at the entry level needs to be a multimedia journalist. So if you show up for a job interview and you don't know how to edit video and you've never touched a camera before, they will say thank you very much and they will throw your application away because you can't do the job. You have to have a very certain set of really highly technical skills to be able to be a storyteller, on top of having the command of language and the ability to write the stories too. So it's the job's changed a lot on the broadcast side of things, but the foundation everybody would need right away is an understanding of AP style and how to write in that kind of either broadcast or print way in a form that's correct. And that's something that, even if it's not necessarily a degree, this is something that you could do at EPCC, is to take a writing course in AP style and to understand how to convey stories like that in a grammatically right way. That's the building block. But the other way, which is so easy, is to follow the work that is already being done in your community to understand what kind of stories are being told and how to tell one. The easiest way, and something that I relied on so heavily when I was looking to get better as a reporter, was, you know, how are these guys doing it? How are the best in the business telling stories so that I can emulate that?
How about what advice will you have for newer people that maybe have a moment that they feel overwhelmed, that maybe they want to quit? What's some advice that you can give them to just keep going?
I think maybe think back on when the work you did had an impact, when you can point to something that you did that made a real world effect on your community. Even if it's not like, I mean, in the best case situations, a story that I could do could change laws, that could change the way that the world around us operates because of something that we brought to light and that needed to change. But even if it's not that huge of an impact, think of something that changed, that brought peace to a family during a difficult time for them. Even though I always think of the hardest part of my job is trying to make families air their grief on, a lot of the time, some of the worst days of their lives, when they've lost someone. And unfortunately, the most pressing time for me to tell that story is like maybe the day before the funeral or the day that they lose someone. And I have to show up and I have to say, hi, I'm Keenan Willard with KFox. I'd really like to do an interview with you right now. And in the back of your mind, always, and really more prevalently at the start of my career, I felt bad about it always, that I was like, these people don't want to talk to me. Like, I'm intruding on the worst day of their life. You know, they just lost a son or a brother, and here I come with a camera. Like, hey, can you be sad for me? Why are you so sad right now? And I didn't understand the meaning behind it. And it wasn't until I read another story about a journalist from, I think it was in the state of Maryland, who felt the exact same feelings that I did about that kind of storytelling, who had an assignment where he had to speak with the mother of a daughter who'd been killed, I think in a car crash or in a murder. She'd been lost, obviously a horrific, tragic death of a young woman, and he'd been told that he needed to call this woman and get her story. And so he's dialing her up, and he's like, I'm the biggest jerk in the world. I'm going to call this woman at her lowest point. And he was already, you prepare yourself to be told that, get out of my face. What are you doing? And he called her, and this woman was overjoyed to hear from him because she was like, I thank you so much. I want to share who she was. I want to tell her story. I want to tell her story. And that opened my mind to the possibility that for some of these people, this is an opportunity because this is a life that happened and it was cruelly lost, but it was also, they impacted so many people, and there are situations where we want to share the light that they were in a community or how they touched other people's lives. And some families will, even in their, darkest hour, they want people to understand. It might be a message about, how to prevent something like that from happening again if it was an accident. But even then, otherwise, in like a situation where somebody was murdered, they still wanted to share what a light that she was, and to make this, to kind of like take back control. And after that, my whole outlook on telling that kind of story has changed. You have to be tactful about it, and obviously so respectful, because this is a tragedy in some of these situations for families. But I also understand that, this might be something that people can gravitate to, and it might bring them peace.
Well, that's such a great take on it, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit from that, and you're absolutely right. So again, thank you for talking about that. Let's talk a little bit about your music career as well. As I was telling my daughter of who you were, she was scrolling through your Instagram, and she told me, hey, did you know he also does music? And then I'm like, yeah, I know that. And he's really good. And I'm like, actually, I mean, again, not because you're here, but it's not bad at all. And it's really good. So I'm like, okay, so definitely a lot to ask around that. When did it start? Is it a hobby? Is it something you want to pursue professionally? Talk to us about that.
That's the question that I get a lot with it, because it is, I think it's rare for somebody in my field where I have to be like so stoic and professional all the time to also have that kind of outlet too. But music's been a lifelong love. Growing up in North Carolina, I taught myself to play the piano and guitar just from like YouTube, just learning chords and being able to accompany myself while I sang. And when I moved out to El Paso, obviously, 1,000 miles from home, I don't know a single soul. And I mean, if not now, when to start writing my own music and just have that kind of outlet.
You write your own music?
Those were all my songs, yeah.
Those were okay. I didn't know
so I put out 4 songs, and I'm just so happy with the outlet that it's provided me for like you kind of said, like there's a lot that weighs on you in this profession, but I also have something that like brings a lot of light and joy to me, and that's music. Definitely. I love singing. I love songwriting, and I love being able to hold up the art that I made and be like, hey, this is what I got.
Nice. Now the question is this a hobby or is this something you want to pursue?
Right. I think that I am primarily a reporter first. Definitely. I think that I'm really proud of the advancement that I've done in my career, and I feel like there's a much more defined path in front of me for being a reporter and climbing the ladder than there is for music, right? If I just have to what's a music career look like? You have to release a hit song and get lucky and strike gold, right? So that's a lot less definite than I love it, and I'll keep doing it, and it's something that brings me so much joy. But I don't know. I'm also not necessarily putting labels on who I am either. I can be a reporter and a musician. Why not?
Why not? That's perfect. Mm-hmm. And now I think that our society welcomes that, instead of just like you said, just a serious person giving the news. You know what? We actually welcome that, and we like that now, right? Because we realize that, I mean, everyone's normal people, right? I mean, you guys are normal. It's not like I'm different from someone else. So, well, thank you for the take on that. Talking about your career, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
In 10 years, unbelievably, I'll be 34. And, ancient at that point. But 10 years from now, I think that I want to get to like that national, that level. Yeah, I want to be already, like, regardless of what happens, I want to see how far I can go.
Nice. Do you know already what steps? You are already taking steps. What else is needed to get to that level? What else is needed to get to that level? Let's begin with that.
The biggest thing is just like you got to climb the ladder, right? The system in broadcasting is made up of markets, media markets, and each one's assigned a number. There's like 230 in the United States, and El Paso is number 93, and it's all based on size from highest number to the top there in New York City is number 1. And the way you get there is just you gotta climb the ladder, and that's why I mentioned like quick stops in each city, like maybe just a couple years. That's the nature of the business, unfortunately.
Nice. Hopefully you still remember El Paso, that border town that you started your career in.
And I have already said, and I always will say, like, El Paso's my why for journalism, because this community showed me why it matters.
Well, well, that's perfect. And you know what? I hate to sound the way I want to sound, but I know you're going to get there. You know, they're just people that know that, you know what, I am willing to put in the work. You know, it's not only goals, oh, here, this is what I want to do, but no, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm going to do. This is what it's required, and watch me do it. So like that's so motivating. And again, I wish you the best of luck. Let's talk about food for a little bit. You know, I usually don't, because here in El Paso, we're big in food, right? But one of your posts, I don't know if it was a post or story, I saw that you were eating enchiladas montadas, which is my favorite dish. The real question here, I don't know, we've been talking for more than an hour, is do you like them with onions or without onions? Now be careful here.
Is this a controversial topic?
Yes, it will be.
I would say with onions.
Oh, okay. There you go. I wasn't expecting that. Now, wait a second. Are you just telling me that because you think that's the right answer? Or is that how you like them? Something tells me you don't like onions.
Yeah, I'm about to be canceled in El Paso because of my enchilada choices. I will tell you, I've already gotten a lot of flack from like my girlfriend's family, because they laugh at me because I like them with, you know, I like red enchiladas with an egg on top or 2 eggs and avocado too. Like, just go all out, all the fixings on there. And they're just like, that's like enchiladas montadas plus, and that's the way to go for me. I love it. Some of my favorite places are, everyone loves L&J, but also Lucy's West to get red enchiladas. They might be my go-to. Those were the ones that I posted from I worked on Christmas this year, and it's never that fun to be away from your family on the holiday, but enchiladas brought me some peace on the holiday. I mean, El Paso's Mexican food is the best in the world. Come on.
It is for sure. Mm-hmm. All right, sir. Well, I have enjoyed our time, so thank you again for the time. Let me just ask you the last question I have for you. Give us something that you love of our city. We can't say food, of course, and maybe one thing that you would like to change or improve about El Paso.
Interesting. Okay. One thing that I love about El Paso is I think that the city's an example for all of America in terms of the way that we conduct ourselves here in the borderland, aside from just being accepting of basically anyone who walks in the door because of our position of a border community. This community is based on, you know, a constant state of flow, ebb and flow with our neighbors to the south in Juarez, right? And it's not something that's been received at all with xenophobia, with a feeling that those who are coming into work for the day and heading back are less than, right? It's an understanding that we have a border between 2 cities, but we are one community, and it's looked at that way, that we can, I mean, aside from nationality, be just people, and it doesn't make anyone better or worse for being like that. I think that when I was watching stories about El Paso before I got here or knew anything about it, you have that idea in your head of, wow, it's right across from Juarez, and it's just got to be this dangerous community, and it's got to be a real rough and tumble border town. And The reality is that it's a shining light for this country because of the way that El Pasoans conduct themselves in this situation. And a lot of the time, that was most evident when we were taking the brunt here for immigration policies that are made so far above the food chain, right, at the federal level, when asylum seekers were basically just being dropped off and El Paso had to take them in, like not even the city, just churches and just shelters and nonprofits. People had to step up, just the people here in El Paso had to make sure that these people had food and could get on to their next destination. Because if they didn't, they would be living in the streets. And that's a challenge the community took on. And they didn't have to. They could have chosen not to. And a lot of people may not have felt that that was the right move. But it's what El Paso did to account for these people at the end of their journey. Wow. So that was something that I loved El Paso for doing, because it shows people that, like I said when I'm reading this book about the migrant from Mexico, that it humanizes things for you, that El Paso kind of has an understanding of who these people are, I feel. And that's something that the entire country kind of needs to ratchet down the rhetoric and the temperature here and bring a little more acceptance to the table, to be more like El Paso.
Such a great take. Thank you, sir. It gives them a really good perception that, again, a lot of times we don't see stuff like that, and we have to, even if we, again, been living in El Paso for all our life, but we need to know what we're doing right, so we continue to do that as well, right? So thank you for that. How about the second part of the question? What is one thing that you would like to change, or maybe let's not say that you don't like, but maybe something that you would like to...
You're putting me on the spot there.
Yes, sir, and make it good, please.
One thing that I would like to change about El Paso, I think maybe El Pasoans can be a little bit resistant to change, right? I think that a lot of people here can be a little bit set in their ways, definitely. And they can be great things that have been present in a community for a long time. But I think that people might need to open your hearts, kind of the way that I was saying in the first part, like the people, but with other concepts, other parts of your life. That there's a lot to gain by progress in in I will say. I'm being very vague.
Is there a specific example that you want to talk about?
I'm being extraordinarily vague. No, I'm just saying, like, no, it's a vibrant community, and I love El Paso absolutely 1,000% and everything about it. And no, I'm not gonna say that there's an aspect of this town that needs to change, because El Paso is El Paso, right? I think the rest of Texas wishes they were El Paso, right?
No, you're right. And again, that can open another topic, but I do appreciate your honesty, because you're right. There's some stuff, and we can have a whole hour talking about that, which we won't. But thank you for that. And again, I just want to thank you for your time. I know, again, COVID, it's a busy time for you. I know yesterday, for example, you were called out to work in your day off, and you spending your time with me in your only day off this week. I want to appreciate it and thank you one more time.
Absolutely. It was great talking to you.
All right. Well, that's all I have. Gracias. Adios.